For nearly 2 centuries, the skies of Westeros trembled beneath the wings of a living legend. She was Vhagar, the last surviving dragon of Aegon's Conquest, a beast whose fire forged kingdoms, whose roar shattered armies, and whose shadow stretched across the history of House Targaryen. She was not merely a creature of myth, nor a relic of the past. She was a force of war, devastation, and absolute power, an apex predator who ruled the skies long after her kin had turned to dust. Born in the wake of the doom of Valyria, she rose to prominence as the trusted war mount of Visenya Targaryen, one of the most formidable queens to ever wield a blade. She fought in the battles that united the 7 kingdoms under Targaryen rule, burning the proudest Westerosi houses into submission with her unmatched fury. Through centuries of conquest and bloodshed, she grew larger, more experienced, and more terrifying, surviving long enough to witness the greatest war of the Targaryen dynasty, the Dance of the Dragons. It was during this bloody civil war that Vhagar, ancient and battle-worn, became the deadliest weapon of all, ridden by the ruthless Prince Aemond Targaryen. Together, they struck fear into the hearts of their enemies, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. The skies of Westeros burned as dragons clashed in aerial duels of fire and blood, but no rival could match Vhagar's sheer size, strength, and experience. Until, at last, she met her fate in one of the most legendary dragon duels of all time, a final battle that would bring her reign of terror to a dramatic and unforgettable end. This is the story of Vhagar, the largest, oldest, and most feared dragon of her age, a beast whose fire shaped the fate of a continent and whose fall marked the end of an era. The origins of Vhagar and the rise of the Targaryens. Unlike many of the legendary dragons that once soared over the Valyrian freehold, Vhagar was not born in the dragon-forged cities of Valyria, but rather in Westeros, making her one of the first dragons to exist outside the great empire of dragonlords. She came into the world during a period of immense turmoil, known as the Century of Blood, a chaotic era that followed the doom of Valyria, the catastrophic event that saw the once mighty civilization of the dragonlords reduced to nothing but fire, ash, and ruins. With the collapse of Valyria, the power vacuum left behind led to endless wars and shifting alliances among the surviving factions in Essos, while the rest of the world watched as the once supreme empire crumbled into history. It was during this time that House Targaryen, one of the minor Valyrian families that had escaped to Dragonstone before the Doom, began preparing for its own ascendancy to power. Vhagar was a crucial part of that plan. Her name was taken from one of the old Valyrian gods, a reflection of her origins and the power her kind once held. It was a name that would eventually be spoken with both awe and terror across Westeros, whispered in legends, and burned into the memories of those who witnessed her devastation. Unlike Balerion the Black Dread, who had once soared over Valyria itself before its fall, Vhagar had never known the homeland of the Dragonlords. Instead, she was a creature of Westeros, raised among the last surviving Valyrian bloodline, growing in power alongside the Targaryens as they prepared to make their mark upon history. Though she was not as colossal as Balerion, her sheer size, endurance, and battle prowess made her an equally devastating force in war. From the moment of her hatching, Vhagar was not just another dragon. She was bred for conquest, trained for battle, and destined to reshape the world. While many dragons were feared, few could match the ferocity and experience that Vhagar would accumulate over nearly 2 centuries of life. She would outlive most of the dragons that came before and after her, serving as both a weapon of war and a symbol of dominion, leaving behind a legacy that few other creatures in the history of Westeros could claim. Her first rider was Visenya Targaryen, the eldest of the 3 Targaryen conquerors. Among Aegon's 2 sister wives, Visenya was by far the most formidable, known for her warrior's heart and unyielding political ambition. Unlike her younger sister Rhaenys, who was beloved for her charm, playfulness, and love of music and flight, Visenya was cold, calculating, and battle-hardened. She was a woman who wielded a Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, and was just as comfortable on the battlefield as she was in the royal court. Many believed that had Visenya been born a man, she would have been the greatest warrior king of her era, and some even speculated that she desired the throne for herself rather than for her younger brother husband, Aegon. Whether that was true or not, there was no doubt that Visenya was the steel behind Aegon's rule, a queen whose mind was as sharp as her blade. Vhagar was a perfect match for Visenya, a dragon just as unyielding and relentless as her rider. While Rhaenys rode Caraxes, a sleek and swift dragon built for speed and maneuverability, and Aegon rode Balerion, the colossal force of destruction, Visenya and Vhagar were the embodiment of military precision and brute force combined. Vhagar was not as large as Balerion, but she was still massive and formidable, a dragon who would only continue to grow over the next 2 centuries. She was capable of devastating entire armies, her fire turning thousands of men into ash within moments, and her presence on the battlefield was often enough to force entire castles into surrender. Unlike some dragons, who relied on overwhelming size or agility, Vhagar's strength lay in her endurance, experience, and sheer aggression, making her one of the deadliest creatures ever to take to the skies over Westeros. When Visenya took to the skies on Vhagar's back, she was not just a queen, she was a conqueror, a warlord, a force that could not be stopped. The bond between them was one of unshakable loyalty and raw power, and together they would change the face of Westeros forever. As the Targaryens set their sights on Conquest, Vhagar's fire was ready to shape the destiny of an entire continent. The Targaryen conquest and the role of Vhagar in shaping a new kingdom. The War of Conquest was a turning point in the history of Westeros, forever altering the balance of power across the 7 kingdoms. It was during this campaign that the Targaryens, led by Aegon the Conqueror, sought to unify the fractured continent under a single rule, a task that had never been achieved in the thousands of years before their arrival. While the sheer brilliance of Aegon's military strategy played a crucial role in his victories, it was the devastating power of his 3 dragons Balerion, Caraxes, and Vhagar that cemented his place as the ruler of Westeros. Each dragon had its own strengths, and while Balerion the Black Dread was the most feared due to his colossal size and pitch-black flames, Vhagar was the dragon who led the charge into battle alongside Caraxes, carving a path of fire and destruction that no army in Westeros could withstand. From the moment Aegon and his sister wives landed in Westeros, they faced warlords, kings, and noble houses unwilling to bow to their rule. In the years that followed, Vhagar became one of the most critical weapons in the Targaryen arsenal, ensuring that the resistance of Westerosi lords would be short-lived. She was not just a tool of war, but a force of nature, one that could burn fields, topple castles, and send even the most hardened soldiers fleeing in terror. With Visenya Targaryen as her rider, Vhagar became a symbol of absolute power, used not only to devastate enemies in battle but also to compel lords and kings into submission without a single drop of blood being spilled. One of the most significant battles of the conquest was the Battle of the Field of Fire, a confrontation that demonstrated the full force of dragonfire upon Westerosi armies. This battle took place when Aegon and his sisters faced the combined might of King Meryn IX Gardener of the Reach and King Loren Lannister of the Rock, 2 of the most powerful rulers in Westeros at the time. These 2 monarchs, understanding the threat the Targaryens posed, joined forces and assembled an army of nearly 55,000 men, the largest fighting force ever gathered in Westerosi history. On one side stood the combined might of the Reach and the Westerlands, a well-trained force that had never been defeated in open battle. On the other stood the Targaryens, vastly outnumbered, yet wielding a power that had never before been seen in Westeros. When the 2 sides met on the battlefield, it became one of the most infamous and horrifying moments in Westerosi history. As the 2 armies clashed, Aegon and his sisters took to the skies. Balerion, the largest of the 3 dragons, cast a shadow over the battlefield, while Vhagar and Caraxes circled from above, their massive wings beating against the air like the drums of war. Then, the dragons unleashed their fury. With flames that burned hotter than any forge, Vhagar, Balerion, and Caraxes bathed the battlefield in dragonfire, setting thousands of men ablaze in an instant. The ground became a sea of flames, and armor melted like wax, fusing to the flesh of the unfortunate soldiers caught beneath the inferno. The once proud banners of House Targaryen and House Lannister were turned to ash, their soldiers screaming as they burned alive in the choking smoke. Over 4,000 men perished in the firestorm, their bodies consumed so entirely that not even bones remained to mark their deaths. The devastation was so absolute that the land itself was forever scarred, leaving behind blackened fields that would never grow crops again. This was the first and only time in Westerosi history that three dragons fought together on a battlefield, and the result was nothing short of catastrophic. The consequences of this battle were immediate and far-reaching. King Mern Gardner, the ruler of the Reach, was killed along with his entire family, effectively wiping out House Gardner from existence. With no surviving heirs, the Targaryens appointed House Tyrell as the new rulers of the Reach, a decision that would have long-lasting effects on the political landscape of Westeros. King Loren Lannister, having barely survived the Inferno, surrendered to Aegon the very next day, knowing that no army in the realm could stand against the dragons. The Battle of the Field of Fire was not just a victory, it was a warning to all the remaining kingdoms. It sent a clear message that resisting Targaryen rule would only lead to death and devastation, and many lords chose to bend the knee rather than suffer the same fate. From that moment onward, the war for Westeros became a campaign of submission rather than prolonged warfare, with many noble houses swearing fealty rather than risking destruction at the hands of the dragons. While Balerian's sheer massive size made him the most terrifying of the three dragons, Vhagar's agility and aggressive temperament made her a dominant force in battle. Unlike Balerion, who was often used for strategic strikes and large-scale intimidation, Vhagar was used more frequently in direct combat, raining fire upon fortified castles and entrenched armies alike. She became the Targaryens' most reliable war dragon, taking part in multiple battles across Westeros and ensuring that resistance crumbled before it could truly take shape. One of the final major conquests that solidified the Targaryens' rule was the subjugation of the Vale of Arryn, one of the last strongholds that had yet to bend the knee. The Eyrie, the ancestral seat of House Arryn, was considered one of the most impregnable castles in all of Westeros, sitting atop a towering mountain with sheer cliffs on all sides. No army had ever successfully besieged or conquered the Eyrie, and the Arryns believed they were safe from Aegon's armies. But the Arryns had not accounted for dragons. Rather than attempting a traditional siege, Visenya Targaryen flew directly to the Eyrie's courtyard atop Vhagar, bypassing the fortress's impenetrable defenses in an instant. The sight of the massive dragon descending upon the castle was enough to send shockwaves through the Vale. The ruling lord at the time, King Ronald Arryn, was still a child no more than 10 years old. As Vhagar landed in the courtyard, the young boy looked up at the colossal dragon, his eyes filled not with fear, but wonder. Instead of demanding surrender, Ronald begged to take a ride on Vhagar, an innocent request that spoke to the child's sheer fascination with dragons. His mother, Queen Regent Shara Arryn, immediately understood the consequences of refusing the Targaryens. She had witnessed what had happened to the other kingdoms that had dared to resist, and she knew that the Eyrie, no matter how strong its walls were, could not withstand the wrath of a dragon. Rather than risk the devastation of her people, she bent the knee to Visenya and Aegon, swearing fealty to House Targaryen. This event further solidified Vhagar's place as a symbol of conquest and submission. Unlike Balerion, who inspired fear through sheer unmatched destruction, Vhagar had proven that her mere presence was enough to change the course of history. Lords and kings had watched as entire armies burned, castles surrendered, and noble houses were wiped out. She was not just a creature of war, she was a living embodiment of Targaryen dominance, and she would continue to shape the fate of Westeros for generations to come. As the War of Conquest came to an end, 6 of the 7 kingdoms had bowed to Targaryen rule. Only Dorne remained unconquered, a realm that would prove to be one of the greatest challenges in Targaryen history. But for the time being, Vhagar had helped shape the future of a new kingdom, one that would stand for nearly 3 centuries before its inevitable downfall. Her fire had forged the Iron Throne, and her legend was just beginning. The Dornish Wars and the first true defeat of Vhagar. The Targaryen conquest had seen the fall of 6 of the 7 kingdoms, bending mighty rulers and their armies beneath the fire and dominance of dragons. Yet, one kingdom stood defiant, refusing to bow to the rule of House Targaryen. That kingdom was Dorne, a land of scorching deserts, towering red mountains, and relentless warriors who had spent centuries perfecting the art of survival in one of the most inhospitable regions of Westeros. While Aegon and his sisters had crushed nearly all resistance across Westeros with dragonfire and military might, Dorne refused to fight by the same rules as the other kingdoms. The Dornish were not interested in meeting dragons on open battlefields where they could be incinerated within seconds. Instead, they waged a different kind of war, one that even the mightiest dragons struggled against. Vhagar, who had previously conquered armies with sheer brute force and overwhelming firepower, would come to face a far different kind of enemy in the Dornish. Unlike the warriors of the Reach, the Westerlands, and the Riverlands, who had stood firm in battle and met fiery death as a result, the Dornish fought like ghosts, refusing to give the dragons a target to burn. They avoided massed battles, abandoning their castles and cities before the dragons could arrive, retreating into the mountains, deserts, and caves where even dragonfire could not reach them. The Targaryens, so accustomed to winning through fire and fear, found themselves chasing an enemy that refused to be caught. At first, it seemed that dragonfire would bring the kingdom to its knees, just as it had with the rest of Westeros. Visenya and Vhagar led brutal campaigns of devastation, reducing entire villages to nothing but scorched earth, leaving trails of fire in their wake. They burned Dornish strongholds, castles, and outposts, attempting to draw out their enemies, but the Dornish simply refused to play into their hands. They let the dragons reduce their homes to ash, but they never surrendered, never came out to fight, never gathered in the open where they could be destroyed. The Targaryens' greatest weapon was fire, but fire could only destroy what was in front of it. The Dornish, understanding this better than any other people in Westeros, simply vanished, refusing to offer a battlefield for the dragons to incinerate. Entire towns were emptied before the Targaryens arrived, leaving only abandoned buildings and barren landscapes behind. No armies waited to fight, no resistance stood in the open. The fire raged, but there was no one left to burn. The first true defeat for the Targaryens came in the skies, when Queen Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon Caraxes met their end at the hands of the Dornish. For the first time since the conquest had begun, a dragon was slain by men. It happened outside the fortress of Hellholt, one of Dorne's strongest castles. The Dornish, rather than meeting the dragon in battle, had laid a trap. As Rhaenys and Caraxes descended upon the castle, a scorpion bolt, a massive spear designed for piercing dragon hide, was fired from the walls, striking Caraxes directly in the eye. The great dragon gave a final, earth-shaking roar before crashing to the ground, sending shockwaves across Westeros. The death of Caraxes was not just a loss for Rhaenys, it was a devastating blow to the entire Targaryen dynasty. Up until that point, dragons had seemed unstoppable, nearly invincible. But now, the impossible had happened. A dragon had been killed, not by another dragon, not by magic, but by the hands of ordinary men. It was a moment that shattered the illusion of Targaryen invincibility and emboldened all those who had thought them untouchable. If one dragon could fall, then perhaps, one day, they all could. The loss of Rhaenys and Caraxes enraged the Targaryens. In retaliation, Visenya and Vhagar unleashed an era of pure destruction upon Dorne, reducing any settlement they could find to nothing but burned ruins. The skies over Dorne were filled with smoke as Vhagar's fire consumed everything in its path. But even in their fury, the dragons could not defeat an enemy that refused to fight. The Dornish continued their tactics of evasion and deception, striking back at the Targaryens with hit-and-run ambushes that slowly drained the morale of their invaders. The war dragged on for years, with Vhagar leading campaign after campaign of fire and death, yet still, Dorne refused to be conquered. The Targaryens would claim victory in battle, only to find that there was no kingdom left to rule. Unlike the other regions of Westeros, where dragonfire had led to swift submission, the Dornish never broke, never bent the knee, never gave Aegon and his sisters the satisfaction of surrender. Instead, they made the war so frustrating and costly that even the Targaryens, with their great dragons and overwhelming power, were forced to accept the limits of their dominion. For the first time in her long history, Vhagar had met an enemy she could not defeat. She had burned armies, shattered castles, and turned proud warriors to ash, yet Dorne remained unconquered. The tactics that had crushed the other kingdoms had proven useless against a people who refused to be ruled. The fire of Vhagar and the fury of Visenya could not break Dorne's will, and in the end, it was not steel, nor battle, nor even dragonfire that ended the war. It was sheer attrition and exhaustion. After years of fruitless destruction, Aegon and his sisters finally abandoned their conquest of Dorne, making it the only kingdom to successfully resist Targaryen rule. Though Aegon would later forge a fragile peace with the Dornish through marriage alliances, the fact remained that Dorne had humbled the mightiest force in Westerosi history. It had survived Vhagar's wrath, endured the flames of conquest, and stood defiantly against the rule of dragons. For Visenya and Vhagar, the war was a bittersweet reminder that even dragons had their limits. Though they had devastated much of the kingdom, their flames had not been enough. Vhagar, who had once reduced entire armies to cinders, had been rendered powerless against an enemy that refused to stand and fight. She had not been wounded, nor had she suffered defeat in combat, but for the first time, her fire had failed to bring victory. This failure left a lasting mark on the history of the Targaryen dynasty. It was the first time that the realm had seen dragons struggle and falter, and it would not be the last. Though Vhagar would go on to fight in other wars, growing even larger and more powerful in the years to come, Dorne remained the one battlefield where she had not claimed dominion. It was a lesson that fire and fury alone were not always enough, and it would echo in the conflicts to come. Even the mightiest dragon of her age had met her match, not in steel, but in the determination of a people who refused to kneel. The Dance of the Dragons and Vhagar's Final War. By the time of House of the Dragon, Vhagar was the oldest and most formidable dragon in all of Westeros. Having lived for nearly 2 centuries, she had witnessed the rise and expansion of the Targaryen dynasty, fought in numerous wars, and survived conflicts that had claimed the lives of nearly all her kin. With Balerion the Black Dread long dead and Caraxes lost during the Dornish Wars, Vhagar stood as the last surviving dragon from Aegon's conquest, a living relic of a bygone era. She had outlived every dragon of her generation, growing ever larger, stronger, and more battle-hardened with each passing year. Her body bore the scars of countless battles, her scales darkened from years of war, and her roar was said to shake the very foundations of castles. She was no longer the swift and aggressive war dragon of Visenya's time. She was now a colossal, ancient beast, a force of destruction that few could stand against. By the time of the Dance of the Dragons, the brutal civil war that tore House Targaryen apart, Vhagar was no longer just a dragon, she was an instrument of war that could change the course of history. Her fire burned so hot that it could melt steel, and her sheer size dwarfed even the largest dragons of her time. No living creature could match her in size, strength, or experience. The younger dragons of the era were formidable in their own right, but none had the battle experience, resilience, and destructive power that Vhagar had accumulated over nearly 2 centuries of conquest and bloodshed. Her new rider was Prince Aemond Targaryen, a warrior feared for his cruelty, ambition, and unrelenting drive for vengeance. Aemond had claimed Vhagar as a young boy, stealing her from the Velaryon family following the death of Lena Velaryon, her previous rider. This act alone ignited bitter resentment, as many had considered Vhagar the rightful inheritance of House Velaryon, given Lena's bond with her. But Aemond had no intention of allowing one of the realm's most powerful dragons to fall into the hands of his rivals. Claiming Vhagar was not just a power move, it was a statement to the world that he was a true Targaryen, a conqueror in his own right. Once Aemond took control of Vhagar, he became one of the most dangerous figures in the Civil War, and his bond with the largest and deadliest dragon alive ensured that he was a constant threat to anyone who opposed the Green faction, the side of the conflict that supported Aegon II's claim to the Iron Throne. Aemond was ruthless, aggressive, and ambitious, traits that perfectly matched Vhagar's own war-hardened nature. He relished the idea of battle, eager to wield Vhagar's destructive power to annihilate the enemies of his house. Together, Aemond and Vhagar became an unstoppable force of terror, striking fear into the hearts of all who stood against them. One of the most infamous moments in her history came when Aemond used her to kill Prince Lucerys Velaryon and his young dragon Caraxes. This event, which took place at Storm's End, was one of the key triggers of full-scale war between the 2 Targaryen factions. Lucerys, sent to Storm's End as an envoy for Rhaenyra Targaryen, had been tasked with securing an alliance with House Baratheon. However, upon arriving, he found that Aemond was already there, attempting to win the Baratheons to Aegon II's cause. What followed was one of the most pivotal and tragic moments of the war. Aemond, still harboring deep hatred for Lucerys, demanded that the young prince take out his own eye as repayment for the injury Aemond had suffered years earlier. Lucerys, refusing to be intimidated, rejected the demand, and tensions between the two young princes escalated. However, Lord Barros Baratheon refused to allow bloodshed beneath his roof, and so Lucerys departed Storm's End, taking flight with Eryx. But Aemond had no intention of letting Lucerys leave unscathed. Mounting Vhagar, the colossal dragon that dwarfed Eryx in every way, Aemond took off in pursuit. The storm raged around them as Vhagar's massive wings cut through the sky, her roars echoing through the clouds like thunder. Eryx, though agile and swift, was no match for Vhagar's overwhelming power. As they battled amidst the storm, it became clear that Aemond had lost control of his dragon. Despite his initial intent to merely frighten Lucerys, Vhagar had other instincts, those of an ancient predator that did not play with prey, but annihilated it. In a moment of sheer brutality, Vhagar clamped her colossal jaws around Eryx, tearing the smaller dragon apart in midair. The force of her attack sent Lucerys and the remains of his dragon plummeting into the sea below, never to be seen again. Though Aemond had not meant for the chase to end in death, Vhagar had made her own decision, proving that even the most experienced dragon riders did not always have full control over their beasts. Lucerys' death sent shockwaves across the realm, ensuring that there would be no possibility of peace between the warring factions. His murder was a declaration of total war, leading to some of the most destructive battles in the history of Westeros. But Vhagar's greatest and final battle came during the battle above the God's Eye, a duel that would go down as one of the most legendary dragon fights in history. In this climactic confrontation, Daemon Targaryen and his dragon Caraxes faced Aemond and Vhagar in a fight that would decide the fate of the war. Daemon, an experienced warrior and one of the greatest Targaryen dragon riders of his time, knew that he could not match Vhagar in size or strength. Caraxes, while formidable, was far smaller and leaner, built more for speed than sheer brute power. But Daemon was not a man who backed down from impossible odds. In a battle that would be spoken of in legends for centuries, the two dragons clashed above the waters of the God's Eye, a massive lake surrounded by ancient forests. The sky was set ablaze as Vhagar and Caraxes locked in deadly combat, their massive bodies colliding with terrifying force. The roars of both dragons echoed for miles as they tore at each other, their wings beating furiously against the stormy winds. Vhagar, with her overwhelming size, ripped into Caraxes with devastating bites, but Caraxes was faster, more agile, and relentless in his assault. The two dragons spiraled through the air, entangled in a death struggle, their fire illuminating the darkened skies. In a final act of unmatched bravery, Daemon Targaryen did the unthinkable. As the dragon spiraled toward the lake below, Daemon leaped from Caraxes' back, sword in hand, and in a breathtaking moment of legendary recklessness, he plunged his Valyrian steel blade, Dark Sister, through Aemond's eye, killing his rival instantly. Both dragons, locked in their death struggle, crashed into the waters of the God's Eye, disappearing beneath the waves. Their bodies were never recovered, lost forever in the depths of the lake. The fall of Vhagar, the greatest and last of the Conquest-era dragons, marked the end of an era. With her death, the might of dragons began to wane, and the war continued its path toward mutual destruction. Though Vhagar had fallen, her name would be remembered for centuries as one of the most powerful, fearsome, and legendary dragons to ever take flight over Westeros. Her fire had shaped kingdoms, her might had determined the fate of countless battles, and in her final moments, she had fought one of the greatest aerial duels in history. Even in death, Vhagar remained unmatched, her name carved into the annals of history as the most fearsome dragon of the Dance of the Dragons. The legacy of Vhagar. Vhagar's name will forever be etched into the history of Westeros as one of the greatest and most fearsome dragons to ever take flight. Her legacy spans nearly 2 centuries, a period in which she shaped the fate of kingdoms, conquered empires, and became a symbol of absolute power. From the moment she hatched in the wake of the doom of Valyria, to her first flight alongside Visenya Targaryen, to her final moments locked in deadly battle over the God's Eye, Vhagar was a living embodiment of war and conquest. She was a force of nature, an entity of destruction whose fire carved the very foundation of the Targaryen dynasty, securing their rule for generations. Throughout her long life, Vhagar was more than just a weapon. She was a legend, a living monument to the might of House Targaryen. Unlike many dragons who lived and perished within the span of a single generation, Vhagar endured for nearly 200 years, witnessing the rise and fall of kings, the triumphs and betrayals of war, and the ever-shifting tides of power. She was there at the birth of the Targaryen Empire, fought in some of the most defining battles of Westerosi history, and played a crucial role in the Targaryen civil war that nearly destroyed the dynasty she helped build. There was no other dragon like her, no other creature in the skies of Westeros that carried such a weight of history upon its wings. Her name will forever be remembered alongside the likes of Balerion the Black Dread and Caraxes, the great dragons of Aegon's Conquest. But unlike them, Vhagar outlived her era, growing older, larger, and more fearsome as time passed. She was the last surviving dragon of the Conquest, the only one to witness the Targaryen dynasty rise from its first battles to its most brutal internal collapse. When Balerion fell and Caraxes was slain, Vhagar remained, a giant among dragons, a force that even time itself seemed unable to defeat. But like all great creatures, even Vhagar was not eternal. Her final flight over the God's Eye, where she met her end in a legendary duel against Daemon Targaryen and Caraxes, marked the end of an era. When she fell from the skies and disappeared into the depths of the lake, it was not just the death of a dragon, it was the death of an age, the last remnant of Aegon's conquest sinking into history. Her fall signified that the time of dragons was coming to an end, that even the mightiest of them could not escape fate. Even in death, Vhagar's legacy continued to echo through the ages. She became a symbol of unmatched strength and devastation, a dragon who had once decided the fate of entire kingdoms with a single breath of fire. Stories of her might continued to be told long after her bones were lost to the waters of the God's Eye. To the warriors of Westeros, she was a terrifying force, a creature whose roar had once signaled the doom of entire armies. To the scholars and maesters who chronicled her history, she was a testament to the unstoppable power of the Targaryens and the sheer destruction they could wield at their height. To House Targaryen, she was a reminder of the golden age of dragon lords, before their house was consumed by internal strife and decay. Vhagar's fall marked the turning point for House Targaryen's dominance. Though the dynasty would continue to rule, the dance of the dragons had crippled them irreversibly. The death of dragons like Vhagar signaled the beginning of the end for Targaryen supremacy, paving the way for their slow decline and eventual downfall. With her passing, the skies of Westeros grew quieter, emptier, and far less dangerous. The world she had once ruled changed forever, and the sight of a dragon became nothing more than a fading memory. But memories are not easily erased, and legends never truly die. For as long as Westeros endures, the tales of Vhagar will be passed down, whispered in the halls of Dragonstone, written in the great histories of Old Town, and spoken in awe by those who still look to the skies and wonder what it must have been like to see the last great dragon of the Conquest soar above the world one final time. Though she may have fallen, Vhagar will never be forgotten. She was fire, war, and fury incarnate, and for as long as men tell stories of dragons and kings, her name will remain eternal. Vhagar's name is one that will never be forgotten. She was a dragon that spanned generations, from the earliest days of the Targaryen dynasty to its darkest civil war. Her fire shaped kingdoms, her presence determined the outcomes of battles, and her final fall marked the end of an era. She was a creature of war and devastation, yet also a symbol of the power the Targaryens once wielded. Her legacy remains immortalized in the tales of Westeros, a reminder that even the mightiest dragons must one day fall.